She stood just inside the church doorway, hands clenched around a borrowed coat.
I don't belong here.
I don't belong here, she said under her breath. No one argued, and that was the problem. The church doors were already open when she arrived. Not wide, not welcoming, just enough to let people pass through without touching the frame. She paused at the threshold, not because she didn't know how to walk in, but because she understood, almost immediately, that stepping inside would change something. The sound reached her first, low voices, layered over one another. Not loud enough to be called conversation, but not quiet enough to be kind. She stepped in anyway. The room didn't fall silent. That would have been easier. Instead, it shifted just slightly, like a current moving beneath still water. Heads turned, then turned back. Eyes lingered a moment too long before finding something safer to look at. No one spoke to her. No one needed to. She stood near the back pew, hands folded loosely in front of her, as if she had practiced exactly where they should go. The coat she wore wasn't hers. It hung just a little wrong at the shoulders, the sleeves a fraction too long. Something borrowed for the sake of appearing as though she belonged. But nothing about her quite settled into the room, and everyone could feel it. A woman near the front leaned closer to her neighbor. A whisper passed between them, carried not by sound but by intention. Another pair of eyes followed her longer than necessary, then narrowed slightly, as if confirming something already decided. No one was cruel. That wasn't how this town worked. Cruelty here was quieter, more practiced. It lived in the spaces between words, in the absence of invitation, in the way no one moved to make room. She chose a seat at the very end of a pew, not beside anyone, not close enough to invite conversation, just present. The service continued. Voices rose together, then fell. A hymn she didn't know, words she didn't follow. She didn't try to sing. She kept her gaze forward, steady, as though the act of looking belonged to her more than the place itself. But even still she could feel it, the weight of being seen without being welcomed, of being measured without being asked. Time passed. Not long. Just long enough for her to understand something clearly. No one here expected her to stay. Her hands tightened slightly against each other, then loosened again. A small, private decision. She stood before the final prayer. Quietly, carefully. The kind of movement meant not to interrupt anything, or anyone. No one stopped her. No one asked why. A man near the aisle shifted his legs, just enough to let her pass, without looking at her face. She walked toward the door the same way she had entered, calm, composed, as though nothing inside her had changed. But something had. At the threshold, she paused again, just for a second, her hand resting lightly against the wood. I don't belong here, she said. Not loudly, not for anyone else. Just enough for the truth to exist outside of her. Behind her, the service continued, unaffected, uninterrupted, and that more than anything confirmed it. She stepped out into the daylight. Cool air met her face, clean and indifferent. She moved down the steps, one at a time, her pace steady, her posture unchanged. If anyone had been watching closely, they might have thought she was simply leaving early. But no one called after her. No one asked her to stay. And that told its own story. She reached the bottom step, adjusted the sleeve of the borrowed coat, and turned slightly, angling herself toward the road that led away from town. Not fast, not rushed, just decided. Behind her, the church doors remained open. Voices drifted faintly into the air. Life continuing, exactly as it had before she walked in. She took one step forward, then another, and another. Stay. The word wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It reached her anyway. She stopped, not abruptly, just enough for the movement to break. For a moment, she didn't turn, didn't look back, as though she needed to decide whether the word had been meant for her at all. Then slowly, she turned, and saw him, standing a few steps above, just outside the church doors. Not hurried, not uncertain, just there, watching her, like he had been watching all along. And for the first time since she arrived, someone wasn't looking away. She turned, slowly, not with surprise, but with caution, as though the word might disappear if she moved too quickly toward it. He stood where the steps met the doorway, one hand resting lightly against the frame, not blocking the entrance, not claiming it either, just occupying space in a way that didn't demand attention, but held it anyway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved faintly across the yard, lifting the edge of her coat before letting it fall again. Behind him, the low murmur of voices continued inside the church, unchanged, uninterested. He stepped down one stair, not toward her, just closer to level ground. "You don't have to go," he said. His voice wasn't loud, didn't carry far, but it reached her clearly. She studied him then, not his face first, but his posture, the way he stood, balanced, unhurried, like a man who didn't speak unless he meant to. "I wasn't asked to stay," she replied. There was no bitterness in it, just fact. He nodded once. "I noticed." That was all. No apology for the others. No explanation. Just an acknowledgement that he had seen what happened and hadn't looked away. She shifted her weight slightly, her hand tightening around the fabric at her wrist. People were starting to notice now. A woman near the doorway paused mid-step, watching. Two men just outside the fence slowed their conversation, their voices lowering further as their attention drifted toward the steps. Not openly, not directly, but enough. This town didn't miss much, and it didn't forget quickly. "You don't know anything about me," she said. It wasn't a challenge. It was a warning. He considered that, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "That's true." A pause. Then, "I know enough." She frowned slightly at that. Not offended, just unconvinced. And what would that be? He stepped down the final stair. Now they stood on the same ground, a few paces apart. He didn't close the distance, didn't try to make the moment heavier than it already was. "That you stood in a room full of people who had already made up their minds," he said, "and didn't ask any of them to change it." The words landed quietly, but they held weight. Her eyes shifted just slightly, not away from him, but inward, as though something in what he said had found its place. "You're wrong," she said after a moment. "I did ask." A small pause, then softer, just not out loud. He watched her carefully, not pressing, not correcting, just letting the truth of that sit between them. The wind moved again, colder this time, carrying the faint sound of the final hymn ending inside. Soon, people would begin to leave, and this moment, whatever it was, would no longer belong only to them. He seemed to understand that. "I have a place," he said. "No build-up, no lead-in, just a simple offering. It's not much, but it's quiet, and it's mine." She didn't respond, didn't interrupt, but her attention sharpened. "A room," he added, "and work if you want it, or just time if you don't." Her expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders did, barely noticeable, a fraction less guarded. He continued, "Just enough. I'm gone most days. People leave it alone." That last part mattered, more than the rest. She looked past him briefly, toward the open doors of the church. The first few figures were beginning to gather near the entrance. Not leaving yet, just watching, waiting to see what this was, what it would become. She turned back to him. "Why?" The question came without softness this time. Clear, direct, necessary. He didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't have one, but because he didn't reach for easy words. "Finally, because you need somewhere to decide what comes next," he said, "and I have space for that." That was all. No mention of kindness. No attempt to dress it up as something more. Just practical truth. And that, more than anything, made it harder to dismiss. She searched his face again, looking for something beneath it. Pity, expectation, obligation. But there was none. Only steadiness. And something else. Something quieter. Respect. That unsettled her more than anything else had. Behind them, the church doors opened wider. Voices spilled out now. Clearer. Closer. A name was spoken, hers. Not loudly, but enough. The moment was closing. Whatever decision she made would be seen and remembered. She looked back toward the road, the one she had already chosen, then at him, still standing, still waiting, but not urging, not pulling, just there. "I won't stay long," she said. It came out almost before she decided to say it. A condition, a boundary, something to protect herself with. He nodded once. "As long as you need." She shook her head slightly. No, she said. Just one night. A beat, as if saying it that way made it safer. More temporary. Less dangerous. He didn't argue. Didn't try to extend it. Didn't even acknowledge the limit. He simply stepped aside, clearing the path between her and the road behind him. Then come on, he said. Simple. Uncomplicated. Like the offer had always been that size. She hesitated. Just for a moment, her eyes drifting once more to the people now gathered near the church doors. Watching. Measuring. Already deciding what this meant. What it said about her. About him. About both of them. Then she adjusted the sleeve of the borrowed coat again. A small, familiar motion. And stepped forward. Not toward the road she had chosen before, but toward him. They walked side by side. Not close. Not distant. Just parallel. The town walked. Of course it did. It always did. And it would remember this. It would shape it into something. Give it edges. Meaning. But for now, it was just a man walking beside a woman who had nowhere else to go. And a decision that wasn't as temporary as she wanted it to be. Behind them, the church emptied. Voices followed. Low. Curious. Certain. Ahead of them, the road stretched out, quiet, unmarked, and waiting. She didn't look back again. Not once. But something in her chest remained unsettled, because one night was how things began. The house sat at the edge of town, not hidden, but far enough that the noise didn't reach it unless it tried. A narrow path led up to the front step, worn in the center from years of the same footsteps, taking the same route. She noticed that first. Not the size of the place, not the condition of the walls, but the rhythm of it. A house that had been lived in, but not tended to. He opened the door, without ceremony. Stepped aside. Let her enter first. No gesture attached to it. No expectation. Just space made where there hadn't been any before. Inside, the air was still. Clean but thin. Like a place that functioned, but didn't settle. She stood just inside the doorway, her eyes moving slowly. Not searching. Not judging. Just learning. A table near the window. 2 chairs. One slightly worn more than the other. A stove along the far wall. Quiet now, but used often enough to show it. Nothing unnecessary. Nothing soft. A house that did what it needed to. And nothing more. You can leave your things there, he said, nodding toward a small room just off the main space. She stepped in. Set her bag down carefully. Not like someone arriving. More like someone passing through. He didn't follow. Didn't fill the silence. The quiet held between them unforced. That mattered. More than either of them said. Later, as the light shifted lower through the window, she moved toward the kitchen space. Opened the cupboard. Paused. Closed it again. Not because there was nothing inside, but because she was measuring something. What was there? What was missing? What could be done? Without asking. Without announcing. She rolled the sleeves of the borrowed coat back slightly. A practical motion. Then reached again. This time, she didn't hesitate. The smell came first. Soft. Unexpected. Not strong enough to demand attention, but different enough to be noticed. He stepped in from outside, just as it reached the front of the house. Stopped. Not visibly. Just enough. As if something had interrupted the pattern he was used to. He didn't speak. Didn't ask. He simply set down what he carried and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, listening, not to the sound, but to the absence of what used to be. When he finally moved, it was slower, measured, like he didn't want to disturb whatever had changed. At the table, she had already set out 2 plates. Nothing elaborate, nothing unfamiliar, but intentional. He sat. She didn't ask if he was hungry, didn't explain what she had made. She simply took her seat across from him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he picked up the fork, took a bite, chewed, considered, not critically, just honestly. The smallest shift crossed his face, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it had been there. She saw it, didn't react, didn't wait for approval. She just continued eating, and that more than anything made him look up again. The next morning, she was awake before the light fully settled, not out of obligation, but out of habit. The kind that forms long before comfort has a place in your life. She stepped outside, paused at the front step, looked down. The wood shifted slightly under her weight. Not broken, but loose. She tested it again. Then again. A small problem. Easily ignored. But she didn't. Later, when he stepped out, it didn't move. He stopped. Looked down. Pressed his foot against it once more. Solid. He didn't ask. Didn't mention it. Just stood there for a moment. Then continued on. But something in the way he walked away had changed. Slightly. Like he had begun to notice what she did when no one was watching. The child came in the afternoon. Quiet at first. Standing just inside the doorway. Watching. Not shy. Just careful. A boy. 9, maybe 10. Old enough to understand more than he said. Young enough not to explain it. He didn't greet her. Didn't ask who she was. He just observed. She didn't approach him. Didn't soften her voice. Didn't try to win him over. She simply continued what she was doing. Moving through the space as though it belonged to her. Not because it did, but because she had decided to act like it might. He stayed longer than necessary. Then left. Without a word. That evening, he returned again. This time he sat. Not close. Not far. Just present. She handed him a cup without looking directly at him. He took it. Didn't thank her. But didn't refuse it either. Progress, in its smallest form. Days passed. Not quickly. But not slowly either. The house began to change. Not in structure. In feeling. A chair shifted slightly closer to the table. A window opened longer than usual. The sound of movement in the kitchen came earlier and stayed later. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would draw attention. But enough that if you had known the place before, you would have noticed. The boy did. Of course he did. He watched her the way children watch something they don't yet trust, but don't want to lose. One afternoon, he tested it. Not with words. With absence. She asked him to bring in wood. He didn't. Not immediately. He stayed where he was. Waited. She didn't repeat herself. Didn't raise her voice. Didn't step closer. After a moment, she looked at him. Not sharply. Not softly. Just directly. The wood, she said. That was all. No edge. No apology. He held her gaze. Searching. For something. Authority. Weakness. Doubt. He found none. After a second, he stood. And did it. Without another word. When he returned, she nodded once. Thank you. Simple. Plain. Enough. He sat back down. But this time, he didn't leave right away. It happened quietly. So quietly it almost didn't register as a moment at all. The next time someone came to the door, a neighbor, curious, careful, not openly unkind, but not welcoming either, the boy answered it, stood in the doorway, blocked just enough of the view behind him. She's just staying, the neighbor said, tone light but pointed. For now, the boy didn't move, didn't look back. She's working, he said, not defensive, not aggressive, just certain. The neighbor smiled thinly, said nothing else, and left. Inside, she had heard it, every word, but she didn't step forward, didn't thank him, didn't acknowledge it. She simply continued what she was doing, because to make it bigger would have made it fragile. And this wasn't. That night, when he sat at the table, he stayed longer, long after the food was gone, long after there was a reason to, and she didn't ask him to leave. Outside, the wind moved through the trees in a steady line. Inside, the house held its quiet, not empty anymore, not quite full, but changing. And for the first time, since she had stepped into that church, since she had stood in a room where no one asked her to stay, someone did, not with words, not directly, but in the way they remained, in the way they returned, in the way they didn't let the space close without her in it. And that was how it happened, not all at once. Not loudly, but undeniably. For the first time, someone waited for her to stay. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to see, easier to name. Instead, it moved the way things do in a small town. Quietly at first, then everywhere. The first sign was not a word. It was a pause. At the general store, where voices usually carried without effort, conversation dipped just slightly as she stepped inside. Not stopped, just adjusted. Enough to make room for something unspoken. She moved past the counter, her steps measured, her expression unchanged. Picked up what she needed. Set coins down one at a time. Exact. No more. No less. The woman behind the counter smiled. Not unkindly, but not fully either. A practiced expression. One that didn't ask questions, but didn't offer answers. You settling in? The woman asked. Light tone. Careful phrasing. She nodded once. I am. The answer ended there. It always did. But the woman lingered a moment longer than necessary, as though waiting for something more, something that would explain. When it didn't come, she looked past her shoulder, and that was when the whisper began. Soft, measured, close enough to be heard. If you were listening for it. She's the one, someone said. From out of town. Another voice. Lower. She didn't just arrive. A pause. Then, they sent her away before. The words didn't land loudly. They didn't need to. They found their place anyway. Because this was how truth, or something shaped like it, moved here, carried in pieces, built in silence, finished in assumption. She didn't turn, didn't react, but something in her hand stilled against the counter. Just for a moment. Then it moved again. She picked up her things, walked out. The bell above the door rang once. Clear. Final. By the time she reached the path home, the story had already begun to settle. Not fully formed, but forming. Enough that by the time he returned that evening, it was waiting for him. It came in the form of a man at the edge of the yard, not close to the house, but not passing through either, standing with the posture of someone who had something to say, and had already decided how it would sound. Seth saw him before he reached the step, didn't quicken his pace, didn't slow. Just approached as he always did. What is it? He asked. No greeting, no pretense. The man shifted his weight slightly, eyes flicking once toward the house, then back. You might want to be careful, he said. Not accusatory, not direct, but pointed. Seth said nothing. The man continued. People are talking. A pause. Then, they say she didn't leave where she came from by choice. Another pause. Longer this time. Asking questions now. About you. That was the part that mattered. Not her. Him. His standing. His name. His place in a town that remembered everything. Seth's expression didn't change. Not visibly. But something in the way he stood became still. Completely. And, he said. The man hesitated. Just for a second. They say she was never meant to stay anywhere long. There it was. Not truth. Not proven. But enough. Enough to plant doubt. Enough to turn quiet acceptance into distance. Seth looked past him then, toward the house, the window, the light inside. He could see her moving, calm, unaware, or maybe aware, and choosing not to show it. He looked back. That all? He asked. The man blinked, caught off guard by the lack of reaction. For now, he said, then turned, walked away, leaving the words behind him. Inside, she had already heard enough. Not the conversation, not the exact words, but the shift. The air carried it, the way silence does when it isn't empty. She stood at the counter, her hands resting flat against the wood. Still, longer than necessary. Then she moved again, finished what she had started, as though nothing had changed. But something had. Later that night, when they sat across from each other, the quiet between them was different. Not heavier, just aware. He didn't bring it up. Neither did she. That, too, was a choice. But silence has weight, and this one carried more than the others had. Finally, she spoke. They know. It wasn't a question. He looked at her. Waited. She continued. They always do. Her voice didn't shake, didn't harden. It simply held. They heard something, she said, or made something. A small pause. It doesn't matter which. He leaned back slightly, not withdrawing, just giving the moment space. Do you want to tell me? He asked. No pressure, no demand, just the option. She held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away, toward the window, the dark beyond it. I left before they could send me away properly, she said. Carefully, measured. I stayed somewhere I shouldn't have. A beat, longer than I was supposed to. The words were plain, but what sat behind them was not. They decided what that meant, she added, and it stayed with me. Silence settled again. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask for more, because he understood something. Some stories don't need detail to carry weight. and pressing them only makes them smaller. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Steady, unbothered. Inside, the house held its quiet, but not the same quiet as before. This one had edges. The next day, it wasn't whispers. It was distance. More space between her and others. Longer looks. Shorter words. The kind of shift that doesn't need explanation to be understood. And then, she heard it. Clear. Unhidden. Two women near the road. Not trying to be overheard, but not trying not to be either. She was never meant to be here. The words settled in the air. Still. Complete. Unquestioned. She stopped walking. Just for a moment. Not long enough to draw attention, but long enough to feel it fully. She looked ahead. The path. The house. The place that had begun to feel less temporary. And for the first time since she arrived, since she stepped into that church and turned when someone said stay. Something shifted back. Not loudly. Not visibly. But decisively. Because this time, they weren't wrong. Not entirely. She lowered her gaze, slightly. Adjusted the sleeve of the borrowed coat. The same motion. The same habit. But it meant something different now. She turned. Not toward the house, but toward the road. The one that led away. Again. And this time, there was no hesitation. No pause. No waiting for someone to call her back. Because some things, once spoken aloud, become easier to believe, and harder to stay against. She didn't walk fast. That would have made it feel like escape. And this wasn't that. It was quieter, more final. Each step measured, each breath steady, as though she had already accepted the outcome, and was simply moving to meet it. The road stretched ahead of her, pale under the afternoon light. Familiar. Too familiar. She had walked roads like this before. Left places like this before. Without looking back. Without waiting. And she would do it again. Because this time, there was no one to stop her. Behind her, the house stood still. The door slightly open. The chair near the window just slightly pulled out. Small signs of presence. Of something lived in. But already beginning to feel like something she had imagined. He noticed first. Not because she made noise. Not because she called out. But because something was missing. The kind of absence you feel before you understand it. He stepped into the doorway. Looked toward the path. Saw the space where she should have been. Empty. And then, further down the road, her. Already moving away. Not hesitating. Not slowing. He didn't call her name. Didn't shout. Didn't ask her to stop. He stepped forward. Then again. Then faster. By the time he reached the main road, others had seen it too. Of course they had. They always did. A small cluster had already begun to gather. Not to intervene. Not to help. Just to witness. A man passing by slowed his horse. Two women stood near the fence, their conversation forgotten. The same eyes. The same quiet judgment. Now turned toward her departure. Toward what they had expected all along. She's leaving. Someone said. Not surprised. Not concerned. Just confirmed. She heard it. Of course she did. But she didn't stop. Didn't turn. Because this time, there was nothing left to misunderstand. They had said it clearly. She was never meant to be here. And this time, she believed them. He reached her before the bend in the road. Close enough to see the set of her shoulders. The way she carried herself. Not broken. Not rushed. Just resolved. He slowed as he approached. Not to match her pace, but to meet it. She sensed him before she saw him. Her steps faltered. Just slightly. Then steadied again. You're leaving. He didn't ask it like a question. She kept walking. Yes. One word. No explanation attached to it. No apology. He walked beside her now. Not blocking her path. Not pulling her back. Just there. They said enough. She added after a moment. Still not looking at him. They always do. He watched her. Carefully. You didn't ask me. The words came quietly, but they carried something different. She stopped then. Finally. Turned to face him. I didn't need to. A pause. Then. I've heard it before. Her eyes held his. Steady. Certain. And behind that certainty, something else. Something guarded. Because leaving was easier. When you didn't wait to be told to. Behind them, the small crowd had grown. Not close. Not involved, but present, watching, as if this moment belonged to them too, as if it needed witnesses to be complete. A man spoke up from the edge. "Best thing," he said, not loudly, but clearly enough. "Some things don't fit where they're put." A murmur followed. Agreement. Soft, predictable, expected. She heard that too. And this time, she didn't argue with it, didn't flinch, because it aligned too easily with what she had already decided. She turned slightly, ready to continue walking, to finish what she had started. "That's enough." The voice cut through the space. Not loud, not raised, but final. He stepped forward, not toward her, toward them, closing the distance between himself and the watching crowd. For the first time, he placed himself between her and everything else. Not defensively, not aggressively, just deliberately. Silence settled, not because they were told to be quiet, but because something in the way he stood made noise unnecessary. He didn't look at all of them, just one, the man who had spoken. "You don't get to decide that," he said, calm, measured, unmoved. The man shifted, uncomfortable now. "It's not just me," he replied. A weak defense. "It's the truth." Seth shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "It's what's easy to say when you don't want to look closer." A pause. No one interrupted. No one stepped forward, because this wasn't anger. It was something harder to argue with. Clarity. He turned then, not back to the man, not back to the crowd, but to her. And when he spoke again, it wasn't for them. She belongs where she chooses to stand. The words didn't echo, didn't need to. They landed exactly where they were meant to. Something shifted, not in the crowd, not immediately, but in her. Because this wasn't defense, not the kind she had known before. There was no pity in it, no obligation, no attempt to fix her, only recognition. He wasn't saying she deserved to stay. He was saying it was her decision, and no one else's. The silence that followed was different, heavier, but not oppressive. Waiting, because now everything had changed. Not the town, not their opinions, but the center of the moment, the choice. She looked at him, really looked, for the first time since she turned away from house. And what she saw was not a man trying to convince her, not someone asking her to stay, but someone who had made space and was willing to stand in it, no matter who was watching, no matter what it cost. Behind him, the crowd shifted, uneasy, not convinced, but no longer certain, and that uncertainty was enough. Her gaze dropped briefly, to the ground, to the path, to the direction she had already chosen, then back to him, and in that moment, everything narrowed. The noise, the people, the past, all of it, fell away, leaving only one question, not spoken, but clear. What would she choose? Now that she could, she took a breath. Slow, steady, not the breath of someone preparing to leave, but of someone deciding whether to stay. The silence held, not fragile, not uncertain, just open, like something waiting to be filled, but not rushing to be. She stood where she had stopped, between two directions. Behind her, the road she knew too well. Ahead of her, the place she had not planned to stay. And between them, him, not reaching, not asking, just standing, as if the moment belonged entirely to her. The crowd had gone quieter, not because they understood, but because they didn't, because something had shifted beyond their control. And now, they were waiting too. She looked at him, longer this time, not searching for intention, not measuring risk, just seeing the steadiness, the absence of demand, the way he hadn't tried to decide for her, even when it would have been easier, even when everyone else already had. He spoke then, not to fill the silence, but to meet it. "There's a place for you," he said, simple, unadorned, not offered like a favor, not framed like a rescue, just stated. She didn't respond, so he continued, not quickly, not urgently. "You don't have to earn it," he said. A small pause. "And you don't have to explain anything to keep it." The words settled between them, carefully, like something that had been considered long before it was spoken. Behind him, someone shifted. A faint sound of disapproval. A quiet reminder that the town was still there, still watching, still forming its opinions, still waiting for the moment to return to something familiar. But it didn't, because he didn't turn, didn't acknowledge them, didn't soften what he had said. She drew a breath, slow, not to steady herself, but to feel the weight of what had been placed in front of her. Not an invitation, a choice. And choices had always come with consequences. Her eyes moved, briefly, to the road behind her, the one that asked nothing, the one that required no explanation, the one that would let her disappear without resistance. Then, to the house, the one that had changed without asking her to, the one that had made space. Before she knew she needed it, the wind moved through the space between them, soft, carrying nothing this time. No voices, no whispers, just air, clean, unclaimed. She stepped forward, not quickly, not dramatically, just once, closing a small part of the distance. Her gaze lowered for a moment, then lifted again, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I didn't belong," she said. The words were not heavy, not burdened by the past, just true. A pause followed, not long, but enough. Enough for everything she had been, every place she had left, every moment she had stood where no one asked her to stay, to exist in that space. Then, "But I do now." The shift was quiet, almost imperceptible, but complete. No one spoke, not from the crowd, not from the road, not from the edges where judgment had once been so certain, because there was nothing left to add, nothing left to correct. The decision had been made, not for her, by her. He nodded once, not in approval, not in relief, just acknowledgement, as if he had always known that this moment would come down to her choosing it. She stepped past him then, not away, not leaving, but toward the house, the same path, the same ground, but it felt different now, not borrowed, not temporary, something else. He turned and followed, not beside her this time, not guiding, just present. The distance between them unchanged, but the meaning of it completely different. Behind them, the crowd began to break apart, not all at once, but gradually. Conversations resumed, quieter now, less certain, because something had happened that didn't fit neatly into what they believed, and that would take time. Ahead of them, the house waited, just as it had before, but not the same. The door still slightly open, the chair still near the window, the small details unchanged, but the feeling, softer, warmer, settled. She stepped inside, not pausing at the threshold this time, not questioning whether she should enter, just walking in, like she belonged there, because now, she did. Later, as the light faded slowly across the room, she moved through the space with quiet familiarity, the same movements, the same rhythm, but no hesitation, no careful distance. Just presence. Outside, the wind settled. The road remained, unchanged, still leading away, but no longer calling. Inside, the house held something new. Not loud, not overwhelming, just steady, like a place that had finally been chosen, not out of necessity, but out of truth. And in that quiet, life continued, not perfectly, not without challenge, but differently, warmer, softer, and finally, shared. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong somewhere, you already know. It only takes one place that feels different, and sometimes that place is waiting for you.